Hello, I'm Maria Ressa, and this is Talk Thursday. Today we talk to ILOILO Representative JANETTE GARIN, the co-author of the Reproductive Health Bill in the lower house. As we all know, the RH bill passed into law the last week of December 2012. Critics, though, seem to want to stop the reproductive health law. On January 2, the family of CBCP lawyer Jo Imbong files a petition asking the Supreme Court to strike down the RH law. Janet, please tell us, is this a serious challenge?
Well, I don't look at it as a serious challenge, but I look at it as one of the reasons why we have to have an RH law. Because we have a lawyer, a very distinguished lawyer, who have been heard all over the country, but here she is being misinformed with information being twisted that it is unconstitutional to plan your family. It's unconstitutional to use condoms. Yeah. It's unconstitutional to use pills. And it's unconstitutional to provide basic necessities for a family who would like to uplift their socioeconomic status.
So what are you planning to do with this?
Well, we leave it as is. We know that we have a mature Supreme Court who will see the real intent of the reproductive health law. And they would, I would of course look at it in a positive aspect that reproductive health and sexuality education is really needed because we have professionals, we have prominent people who are, sad to say, still in that pale of ignorance in terms of reproductive health simply because we allowed it to happen.
Let me ask you that. And folks, anyone watching us, please send your questions in. #TalkThursday, tag @Rappler.com. Questions to Representative JANETTE GARIN. Why did it take so long, and how difficult was it to really pass this bill?
It was very difficult, very difficult. When I joined Congress, I thought it was one of the advocacies that will be easy to pass.
You joined Congress 9 years ago, almost 9 years ago.
Yes, almost 9 years ago, 2004. Believing that people really wanted to uplift their socioeconomic status.
Correct.
But the political implication was so great. After my first term, when I became very vocal and then went out of my way, talking to people, convincing them, explaining the positive aspects and the goodness that this law will bring into our country, I earned all the complication by 2007, which was the next election.
What does that mean? Yeah.
Pro-life put up a candidate against me. He was a retired general, and people were talking about my proposal to legalize abortion. This was this euthanasia issue, I think, in Switzerland.
Yes.
And they were playing it all over that Janet wants to legalize euthanasia. It was just very difficult because you are dealing with people who have no idea what reproductive health means. Plus the fact that some of the members and the officials of the church were successful enough in linking reproductive health to abortion and euthanasia. And in an election, you go to a stage, you explain to your people, but here comes the church with several seemingly pseudo radio stations going on every Sunday, and that's the pulpit. And it will be very expensive to justify your cost and your advocacy because radio time is also expensive during elections. And I realized that the main problem was political survival for many of our colleagues because you wouldn't like a complication coming up during the next elections.
So they it's the pressure of the church and then the lawmakers not wanting to deal with possible consequences of fighting the church. Is that correct?
For many, yes. For others, it was tolerable. But basically, if you have a political problem, then RH becomes a complication. That's why I have been repeatedly saying that it's very difficult to pass it because it becomes, and that's why we need a law, because reproductive health services almost always becomes a tool for political bargaining. Like, you would like more taxes, and if the church says, okay, we'll go with you, but drop RH. You would like mining because it's, responsible mining for livelihood and for economic upliftment, and then the church would say, yes, but then you drop RH. So
what made this Congress different? What strategy? How were you able to pass it 14 years in?
I would attribute it to a very popular president with a high satisfaction rating who has no plans of running again.
Why? Explain to us why that became necessary.
Because if you talk about good governance, if you talk about doing something good, there will always be political backlash. And if you are not that popular and your rating dips,
Yes.
then it becomes a major problem.
Okay, I see. But in your political career, obviously taking a pro-RH stand didn't stop you from getting reelected.
Yes,
So-
yes.
Just seeing your own career, didn't that show the lack of power of the Catholic Church on a national stage?
Well, it's a case-to-case basis. On my part, I've been practicing as a medical doctor before I came to Congress. So when I stood up and explained, and when people and some of the who are against the bill tried linking abortion and euthanasia to RH, they believed me because I've been going around bringing health concerns,
Yes.
health advocacies. And I was probably privileged enough to be able to explain it deeply and clearly to my constituents. But it was really tough. But when I started explaining it and people started realizing that indeed it was for common good, and then I showed them a replica of how services should be provided, it was, of course, it was consuming much of your time. But at the same time, if you will be able to explain and tell them that this is not so, the counter event happens and people will start sympathizing with you, and I ended up unopposed on my third term because it was not an issue anymore. And the more that some priests discuss this on the pulpit,
Yes.
the better, the bigger sympathy I get from the voters.
Do people still question the ideas behind it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, some.
But
Some.
When you say some, I guess in terms of ideas, I mean, some of the questions, of course, come down to, well, population growth isn't connected to this, and it will lead to greater, what's the word I'm thinking of, that people will have more sex, that you will encourage children, like younger teenagers to have
But
sex. when
I was
doing all
able
of
to
this.
explain it to them, and then I kept on going back to teenage pregnancy, on how it has affected students, on how cervical cancer has increased
Yes.
because of misinformation, and all
Interesting.
these things. Basically, another asset that I had in terms of political survival is that there was 99.9% literacy rate in my district. It will be very difficult to explain it in areas wherein people are not that educated.
When this came to a head in this Congress, how would you describe the way lawmakers reacted? And we know the way they voted, but how would you describe the mood? And it came to a head.
Yes, yes. But it was worst in 2007 because there was really a huge clamor for it. Social media, the tri-media sector was very active. People became involved. People started to realize that reproductive health is for them. Reproductive health is pro people, it's pro poor, it's pro quality life. And people started the noise, similar to how they did it for the passage of the cheaper medicines law. But the problem there was the president had a lot of political problems. And while we were very enthusiastic in passing it, because we knew we had the numbers in Congress, and we knew that people were already proactive, people were involved, there was much media and people involvement. And so there was this head-on and everything, but when the president came, and it was very obvious that the former president will submit to the request of CBCP.
Yes.
Then it clearly taught us one of the big lessons that you learn in politics, and that is if you need something to be passed, especially if it's controversial, political will, and I mean strong political will, should start with the president.
Interesting. Now that it is a law, what happens next? How long until Filipinos feel this?
I would personally put it at 3 years, the effects, because you'll be dealing with crafting a curriculum answerable to age-appropriate education. And children will start to learn, internalize, and discuss it among peers, among teachers. You have to have trained teachers. And then for those who are availing of the services, having 2 or 3 years as a breathing space for the next child, they will feel it 3 years. But the effect on a macro level, on a national perspective, in terms of improving the quality of life, would probably be 5 years and more.
You're working on the IRR now, right? So you're still going through the different...
We will be starting, as I was told.
Okay. Passing this bill through this Congress, you talked a little bit about the lessons you learned in politics, but tell us more about what lessons did you learn about Philippine politics?
Well,
and Filipino politicians. So,
even if the passion is there, even if the advocacy is there, it all boils down to political survival at the constituency level, at the district level. And media plays a very important role in here. Because if you will be able to explain to the people, if you'll be able to explain the good things, the good intention of a certain measure, then a politician will not have a hard time defending his vote. But if people are grossly misinformed, it will be very difficult for a politician to defend his or her vote.
What were the high points and the low points with this Congress? This Congress passed historic legislation, not just this, but the sin tax. The president signed desaparecidos into law. Is anything different with this Congress? You've been through 3 terms.
Yes, definitely. Previously, any decision, even if you had the numbers, it was very difficult. If lobby groups came, if there was huge external pressure, interest, businessmen who would be thinking of their business without some semblance, with a very minimal semblance of a corporate social responsibility, if I may say. One of the major differences that I noticed is that this Congress, because there was guidance from the President, the strength and the political will that the President displays transcends into the leaders of Congress. And that's, it was very obvious with the way we were passing bills that was actually taboo to touch in the previous Congresses.
Right. How many of your fellow legislators had a sense of the impact, aside from political survival, which is actually what every politician needs to deal with, right? How many of them would forego in order to look further ahead, look at the future?
Very difficult to say, and it's a case-to-case basis. It usually boils down to the fact of whether there is somebody famous who's planning to run in his or her district. And the early filing contributed to the success of the RH law, because we had many colleagues who were by heart supportive and who really believe in our advocacy, but they still didn't know if they will be up against a very strong opponent. And when filing came and most of our colleagues found out that their opponent will either be somebody who is not perceived to be a serious candidate, then they started coming out and telling us, look, I have no opponent, or I don't have a strong opponent, and I'm willing to come out.